The rain lashed against the rusted roof of the roadside diner where Grace Miller worked long shifts to keep her brother alive and herself afloat. The clatter of dishes and the sharp scent of burnt coffee filled the air as she wiped down the counter for the 100th time that day, hands chapped from too much soap and too little rest. Outside, her younger brother Jamie lay curled up on a bench under the cracked awning, a fraying coat barely shielding him from the storm. She'd promised him things would get better, but promises didn't pay hospital bills. Grace had been running on fumes for months, barely scraping together enough to keep the lights on at their tiny rented room. Her heart ached as she looked out at Jamie again, just as the door behind her creaked open with a gust of cold wind and a stranger stepped inside. Liam Westwood was the kind of man who didn't belong anywhere near a place like this. His coat was tailored, his shoes untouched by the puddles outside, and his presence sucked the noise out of the room. Grace turned, instinctively straightening her back. He looked directly at her, his eyes a steely gray, calm and calculating. "Grace Miller?" he asked, as if reading her off a list. "Yeah, that's me," she replied slowly, her voice guarded. He reached into his coat and pulled out a photo, one of her volunteering at a soup kitchen months ago, before things got worse. "I need your help," he said, placing the picture on the counter. "And I'm willing to pay you well for it." The words hung between them, strange and heavy. She didn't know this man, but desperation had a way of making you listen to things you normally wouldn't. She narrowed her eyes. "Help with what, exactly?" Liam's voice was steady and sharp. "I need a wife. Temporarily. 1 month. Appearances only." Grace blinked. "A wife? My grandmother's final wish is to see me happily married before she signs over my share of the Westwood estate. She's old-fashioned, believes in love and family. I need someone who can convince her I've found both. And I believe you're perfect for the role." Grace scoffed, unsure if she should laugh or run. "You want me to lie to your dying grandmother?" "She's not dying," he said plainly. "She's just persuasive. And this is a business arrangement. Nothing more. You'll be compensated generously." He slid a manila envelope toward her. She peeked inside and froze. Checks. Real signed checks. Grace swallowed hard. This was crazy, but it was also salvation. The offer haunted her through the night. She sat on the edge of her thin mattress, Jamie's shallow breathing filling the silence beside her. What kind of man pays a stranger to play his wife? What kind of woman says yes? But every time she thought of turning him down, she saw Jamie's face. Gaunt, pale, too tired for someone so young. The hospital bills, the overdue rent, the crushing weight of it all. It was drowning her. And here was a lifeline, no matter how twisted. At dawn, she called the number on the card Liam had left. He answered after the first ring. "I'll do it," she said, barely recognizing her own voice. "Good," he replied, his tone unchanged. "My driver will pick you up tomorrow at 10. Grace had never been in a luxury car before. The seats felt like butter beneath her, and the world outside the tinted glass seemed distant, like a movie she wasn't part of. Liam sat beside her, speaking into his phone with precise, clipped tones, issuing instructions about press releases and schedules. When he hung up, he turned to her. "There will be no deviation from the plan. You will follow my lead, speak when needed, and keep your personal life private." Grace nodded slowly, unsure whether to be offended or relieved. He handed her a tablet loaded with information, his biography, public photos, details about his grandmother, their supposed love story. "Learn it," he said. "We'll be seen together tomorrow at the Westwood Gala. Our first public appearance as husband and wife." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she held the device. Her life was no longer hers. Not for the next 30 days. The Westwood Gala was everything Grace had never imagined she'd be part of. Champagne fountains, paparazzi flashes, and an ocean of people dressed like royalty. Her new designer gown clung to her frame like it had been sewn with secrets, and the borrowed diamonds at her neck sparkled like betrayal. Grace stood beside Liam at the entrance to the grand ballroom. Her arm looped through his, her smile practiced a dozen times in the mirror. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back, the gesture warm to onlookers, but robotic to her. "Smile like you mean it," Liam whispered without turning his head, his voice low and firm. Grace adjusted her posture, reminded again that this wasn't real. Just a part she had to play. For Jamie. For the money. For survival. Inside, the air buzzed with wealth and ego. Waiters glided past with trays of hors d'oeuvres Grace couldn't pronounce. And women in gowns worth more than her yearly rent exchanged air kisses that sounded like secrets. Liam was magnetic, effortlessly slipping into conversation with CEOs and politicians. His voice steady, his smile professional. Grace kept close, nodding politely when introduced, her lips curling up just enough to seem invested. But every step she took felt like she was walking deeper into someone else's life. Then came the moment she'd been dreading. "Grandmother," Liam said, his voice softer now. Grace turned to see an elegant older woman in a silver dress and pearls, her sharp eyes scanning her with unsettling precision. "So this is the woman who's managed to thaw your frozen heart," she said, raising an eyebrow. Grace swallowed hard and extended her hand. "It's an honor, ma'am." The matriarch's grip was firmer than expected. "Don't call me ma'am," she said curtly, though not unkindly. "Call me Evelyn. If you're truly family now, then let's not be strangers." She turned to Liam. "And you, if you let this one slip away, I'll know you're truly hopeless." The moment passed in a blur, but the implication hung thick in the air. Grace played her part well, answering Evelyn's questions with charm and just enough humility to seem genuine. She told a fabricated story of meeting Liam at a nonprofit event, bonding over books and late-night ramen. Liam had drilled it into her memory for hours. As she spoke, she could feel his gaze on her, watching for cracks, but also something else, something curious, almost confused. When Evelyn excused herself, Liam leaned closer. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "Almost too well." Grace gave a tight smile. "Guess I'm a better liar than I thought." Hours passed like minutes, and Grace was exhausted. She had danced once, awkwardly, with Liam, who had placed a steadying hand on her waist and guided her through the steps with a blank expression. Still, there had been a flicker of something in his eyes, a moment when their gazes locked and the air between them shifted, like a page turning. It unsettled her more than she expected. "You handled my grandmother better than most people," he said on the car ride back, the tension between them heavier than the silence. She actually smiled. "That's rare." Grace turned to the window, the city lights blurring into a river of gold and gray. "That's because I didn't pretend to be someone I'm not," she said. "I'm not good at games, Liam. Not the kind rich people play." He said nothing, but his jaw tightened slightly. Back at the penthouse, Grace peeled off the gown with trembling fingers. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, no longer the waitress from the diner, but not quite the woman she had pretended to be either. Somewhere in between, she was losing grip of who she really was. Liam passed her in the hallway, heading to his room, his tie loosened, expression unreadable. "We'll have breakfast with Evelyn tomorrow," he said. "She wants to know you better." Grace nodded, unsure what to say. He paused, then added, "You did well tonight. I didn't expect that." Before she could reply, he disappeared into the shadows of his room. Grace stood there alone, wondering if she'd somehow crossed a line she hadn't meant to, and whether he had, too. The next morning, the smell of fresh croissants and brewed coffee wafted through the penthouse, a stark contrast to the instant oatmeal Grace usually ate on cracked plates. She sat stiffly at the grand dining table, the white linen napkin in her lap already creased from her fidgeting. Liam sat at the head of the table, composed as ever in a navy suit, casually sipping his espresso as if this morning was routine. Across from them sat Evelyn Westwood, her sharp eyes scanning Grace over the rim of a porcelain teacup. "You don't have the usual polish, my dear," she said after a long silence, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "But you have sincerity. That's worth more than all the etiquette schools in Europe." Grace managed a small smile. "Thank you, Evelyn. I've never had polish. Just practice." The older woman chuckled. a rare sound that caught even Liam off guard. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, tapping the edge of her cup. "Tell me, Grace, what made you fall in love with my grandson? He's not exactly charming company." The air thickened. Grace had memorized a version of the answer Liam's assistant had crafted. Something about ambition, kindness beneath the surface, shared values. But instead, she went off script. "He doesn't pretend," she said. "He's honest about who he is, even when it's difficult. I respect that." Liam looked up from his plate, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Evelyn nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "A refreshing answer," she murmured. "Maybe he's finally found someone who sees past the Westwood name." The moment passed quietly, but Grace could feel its weight settle over the room like a curtain slowly drawing open. For the first time, she wondered if this plan wasn't just fooling Evelyn, but confusing Liam, too. After breakfast, Evelyn asked to walk through the garden terrace with Grace alone. The two women stepped into the sunlit space lined with manicured hedges and blooming orchids. "You know, I was once in your position," Evelyn began, her voice softer now. "A woman plucked from obscurity, thrown into a world where every glance carries judgment." Grace glanced at her. "And how did you survive it?" Evelyn smiled wistfully. "By remembering who I was before all this. Don't lose yourself in their world, Grace. Liam is a good man, but he's lost in his own armor." The older woman turned back toward the dining room. "He needs someone who reminds him how to feel, not just how to function." Grace stood quietly in the garden after Evelyn left, the words clinging to her like petals on wet skin. She had come here for money, nothing more. But now doubt was seeping in. That night, the penthouse was quieter than usual. Liam returned late from a board meeting, his tie loosened and expression taut. Grace sat on the couch reading through more of their shared history notes, but her mind wasn't on the text. "How was Evelyn?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "Blunt," Grace replied, "but honest. Like you." He let out a dry laugh. "She likes you. That's unexpected." Grace looked up. "Why?" "Because I'm not from your world." Liam hesitated. "Because you don't play games. Most people around me only know how to perform." He sipped the scotch, then added, "You were never supposed to matter, Grace. This was supposed to be clean." The words hung there, heavy and raw. Grace's chest tightened. "And now?" she asked softly. He looked at her, but didn't answer. Grace lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, Evelyn's words echoing in her mind. Don't lose yourself. But what if she already had? This wasn't just an act anymore. Not entirely. Every touch, every gaze, every off-script comment. Pieces of something real were beginning to form between the lies. She had never expected Liam Westwood to be kind beneath his cold edges, or to look at her with anything other than business in mind. But here she was, tangled in a story she wasn't sure she could rewrite. If she fell, there would be no safety net, no happy ending guaranteed, just the truth. And that, more than anything, terrified her. The following week blurred into a series of public appearances, stage dates, and whispered compliments delivered in front of cameras. Grace wore designer gowns and smiled for photographers, her hand delicately resting on Liam's arm like she belonged there. The media quickly took notice of the unlikely romance, splashing their photos across gossip sites and business headlines. Billionaire Westwood finds love in the unlikeliest place, one read. But behind the flawless images and glowing praise, Grace could feel the cracks forming. Liam was still calm, distant, methodical, but he lingered longer in conversations with her now. He asked about Jamie. He noticed when she skipped meals. And Grace, in turn, found herself drawn to the version of Liam no one else seemed to see. The man who loosened his tie in the car and sighed like he hadn't exhaled in years. One evening, after a gala at the Metropolitan Museum, Liam surprised her by suggesting they stop for street food. "We'll be mobbed," Grace said, laughing nervously. "Not if we wear these," he replied, pulling out 2 baseball caps and sunglasses. And just like that, they slipped into the New York night like 2 strangers on the run. They shared greasy tacos from a sidewalk vendor, sitting on a bench in Central Park, the cold wind biting at their fingers. Grace talked about her childhood, about the fire that took their home, and how Jamie's asthma started. Liam listened, not nodded, not smiled, but truly listened. When she turned the conversation toward him, he hesitated before revealing that he hadn't spoken to his father in over 10 years. "He wanted me to become him," he said, "and I couldn't, so I left and built my own empire." The pain in his voice wasn't part of any script. That night, back at the penthouse, Grace found herself standing at Liam's door, unsure why her feet had brought her there. Before she could knock, he opened it. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Not really," she replied. "You?" "Same." They sat in silence on the edge of his bed, the room dim except for the city lights bleeding through the glass. "This was supposed to be simple," Liam murmured. Grace turned to face him. "It's not," she said. "Not anymore." There was no kiss, no dramatic embrace. Just a long look, raw and unfiltered. Liam reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and in that moment, something shifted. Something unspoken but undeniable settled between them. And though neither of them said it, they both knew the line they'd drawn weeks ago was now hopelessly blurred. The next morning, Grace woke up alone in her room, but her mind was still tangled in that moment. She dressed slower than usual, her thoughts louder than her steps. When she entered the kitchen, Liam was already there, dressed for work but quieter than normal. "We should be careful," he said, eyes on his coffee. Grace nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "I know." The contract still loomed between them, a ticking clock counting down their 30 days. But rules had already begun to bend, and both of them could feel it. When Evelyn arrived later for brunch, she commented on how comfortable they looked. "You two have grown into each other," she observed with a smile that felt too knowing. Grace wondered how much the older woman truly saw, perhaps everything. By evening, Grace stood on the balcony, watching the city breathe beneath her. She clutched her coat tighter, unsure if it was the cold or the fear creeping into her bones. What started as survival had become something dangerous. She was falling for the man, not the money, and that terrified her, because in 30 days she was supposed to walk away. But how do you walk away from something real when it wasn't supposed to exist at all? The final week came faster than Grace expected, each day slipping through her fingers like sand she couldn't hold on to. With only 5 days left in their arrangement, the air in the penthouse grew heavier, thicker with tension, words unsaid, and glances that lingered longer than they should. Liam became more distant again, retreating behind meetings and late nights, as if pulling away before the inevitable goodbye. Grace didn't ask questions. She didn't push. But every time he walked past her without a word, something in her heart cracked. The pretense had become a burden, not a shield. The fake kisses for the cameras had started to feel real. The laughter, the stolen moments, none of it was part of the contract anymore. And the silence between them was louder than any argument. On the 4th night, Grace stood in the walk-in closet Evelyn had insisted she use. The clothes, the shoes, the perfume, it all belonged to someone who didn't exist. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw the girl Liam Westwood had created. Not the woman who had once scrubbed tables at the diner to feed her brother. But she also saw someone stronger, someone who had survived. When Liam entered, she didn't turn. "Are we just going to pretend none of this happened?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first. Then, in a voice barely audible, he said, "I'm trying to protect us." "From what?" she asked, facing him now. "From a reality we can't afford," he said. "This ends in 5 days. We agreed. If I let it mean something, I'll want more. And you deserve more than what I can give." Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded and walked past him. Evelyn noticed the shift. The next morning over tea, she placed a wrinkled hand on Grace's. "You don't have to tell me," she said gently. "But I can see you're hurting. And so is he." Grace bit her lip. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Evelyn chuckled softly. "The heart doesn't follow instructions, darling." It follows connection. She looked out the window, her gaze distant. I made the same mistake with my husband. I let fear convince me that love needed logic. I nearly lost him because of it. Grace whispered, "What happened?" Evelyn smiled. "He fought for me, and I realized no contract in the world was stronger than what we had." Her words stayed with Grace all day, echoing in her mind long after the tea had gone cold. The fifth day arrived with a letter on Grace's pillow, her final payment, an envelope with her name written in Liam's elegant script, and a note that read only, "Thank you for everything." No explanation, no goodbye. He wasn't even home. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope. This was what she came for. This was the deal. But as she held the check in her hand, it felt like ash. Jamie would be safe now. They could move somewhere warm, start fresh. But the idea of leaving without looking Liam in the eyes felt like a betrayal to both of them. So she didn't pack. Not yet. That night, Liam returned late, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, tie loosened, eyes heavy. When he saw Grace still there, sitting quietly in the living room, he froze. "You didn't leave," he said. "I couldn't," she replied. "Not like this." He looked away. "It's better this way, is it?" she challenged. "Because nothing about this feels better." He stepped closer, hesitated, then sat across from her. "I didn't plan to fall for you, Grace." Her breath caught. "Then why are you pushing me away?" His voice cracked. "Because everyone I've ever loved left, or was taken from me, and I'd rather end this on my terms than lose you when I finally need you most." She stood slowly and crossed to him, cupping his face with both hands. "You haven't lost me yet, Liam, but if you don't fight for this, you will." Comment part 2, if you want to see what happens next.